Hello and welcome to the Origins of Theatre, Module 1, and this is an introduction to theatre, particularly for those students who may have little or no experience with the theatre form. So the origins of theatre, let's just remember, this is a good theory of knowledge point, that there is little information available from ancient artifacts, wall paintings, hieroglyphics, but they help to give us an idea for where theatre originated from. And these are the 5 main areas: storytelling, mimesis, ritual, games, and dance, and they'll all be covered one at a time in this presentation. First one is dance. So we can see in ancient times dance and movement used as a celebration, an entertainment, a communion with natural and spiritual forces, so a strong religious purpose in different cultures. And of course, dancing can bring a community together, express their collective fears, griefs, and hopes. So examples are like tribes that have had war dances in preparation for conflict between the tribes. It's almost like a rehearsal for the battle. Foot stamping movements on the grounds of funerals, over the graves to ensure spirits of the departed do not rise up against the living. Singing, clapping, dances calling for rain to fall if there's been a drought. So all of these movements and rituals that could evolve into dance. And singing, clapping, and drumming thought to have commonly accompanied these dances. So if you're looking for dance theatre, where that may have begun, involving mimetic movements, so mimed movement, acted movement, music, acrobatics perhaps, you could trace that back. Probably the earliest is in ancient Egypt, and performances that celebrated the sufferings and power of the god Osiris. And it's thought that dances at this time were synchronized. People did the dance moves together. You can also find similar characteristics in the theatre of ancient Greece, which is where, I guess, classically in education, people usually consider theatre to have begun from. But you can trace theatre actually back further to places like ancient Egypt. And there's a copy of a wall painting from a tomb in Egypt giving evidence of what could be synchronized dances, synchronized movement, kicking their legs there, and musicians performing. So in some cultures, dance and theatre are inseparable. In a country in East Africa where I used to live, in fact, the Swahili word for dance and theatre were the same. And dance and theatre, particular emphasis on movement. If you're looking at what kind of theatres have an influence with dance, there's so many. Musical theatre I didn't put here, but Commedia dell'arte has an aspect of it. African indigenous theatre, all the indigenous theatres. Meyerhold's biomechanics, Jerzy Grotowski's Theatre Laboratorium, and then coming up to more modern contemporary theatres like DV8 from the UK. So you can follow the link and the development and the refinement of dance as an influence of theatre to becoming a style or a form of theatre itself. The second element of the origins of theatre, storytelling. And the oral tradition is rooted in many, in fact, most cultures. That is oral tradition, where you pass stories down and information down by word of mouth. Someone hears it and they pass it on. So telling stories has long been a vehicle for entertainment, education, information, passing on traditions, values, and beliefs. And of course, storytelling is a part of mythology, where you just tell stories of special events, special people. And of course, storytelling in the oral tradition was particularly important in society before print technology, that is, before books and paper and words on paper could be printed. It was the prime way before then of passing on the elements I've just mentioned. And there's other aspects of storytelling that you can easily see could become theatrical, that stories often usually have a beginning, a middle, and end. They have characters to identify with. There are themes, ideas, and values, often reflecting those of the author or the teller of the story. They arouse emotion and imagination in those receiving the story. And all of that can lend itself most effectively to theatre. So you can imagine, going back hundreds of years, how that transition from oral storytelling to active imitation of stories being acted out could occur. And when you say storytelling, it's not just necessarily one person sat around a campfire with a group of people telling a story. It can involve singing, chanting, music, poetry. In some cultures, when you think about storyteller, the people expect it to be presented by a singer and sung. And in ancient times, of course, a storyteller was not just an entertainer, but a teacher, a spiritual leader, healer, historian, keeper of traditional values. And the ability to tell stories was sometimes considered to be transmitted through the gods, messages from the gods, through the shaman or shaman, the holy or wise person who transmitted it to the people. And of course, that connects again to ritual, which will soon. And traditionally, storytelling was a communal experience like dance. You have people to tell it, you have people to hear it. And particularly strong roots in all traditions, Africa, Arabic, Asian, Eastern, Mediterranean, European cultures. If you're linking that development and refinement through to modern theatre, you can think of someone like Bertolt Brecht and his epic theatre with particular interest in narrative and characteristics or techniques of the storyteller and storytelling on stage. And this is a photo, one of my own photos of a storyteller in the storytelling position during an indigenous Tanzanian theatre performance. This is courtesy of Usinga Theatre in Bagamoyo in Tanzania. You'll notice that the storyteller is dressed in a grass skirt. That is not intended to be a stereotypical or racist. This is what the Usinga Theatre boys wore as their costume when they were performing this particular story. Although, of course, there is an influence when you know that there's many tourists that will be coming to watch these stories. The third aspect is ritual. Some say that theatre really, its roots are in ritual, and what ritual and theatre share is a need to be performed, to be witnessed. Rituals are events that help to sustain the spiritual, social, and political order in communities, and so they're very much tied to religious and belief systems of that society. Just like theatre, they often take place in special or particular performance spaces. That may be a sacred space, maybe a space particularly made for theatre, or it may be a found space, perhaps on a baobab tree, a special rock, somewhere that becomes a space for the duration of the ritual. And there's usually some kind of spectator, just like in theatre, but there is often a blur between spectator and performer, because sometimes the spectator will become involved in the ritual at some point. And rituals, you can see how this links with what we've been talking about so far. They usually is some combination of song, music, dance, movement, imitation, story, and chanting. The one thing about rituals is they traditionally involve some level of real change. And I'll just put an example here from my own experience of witnessing a ritual near Bagamoyo in Tanzania. A young girl, aged 13, she'd hit puberty. And so there was a 3-day ceremony, including performative aspects, to mark her transition from girl to woman. And after the 3 days, of course, she was regarded as a woman, which means it's possible for her to get married and have children. Whereas before that ritual, that would not have been the case. So there's an actual function as well as a performative one. And you can link that with modern theatre, because for some people theatre is just entertainment and it's passive. But there are particularly modern theatre forms that have been interested in using ritual as a force for real change in society. For instance, again, Bertolt Brecht, Grotowski, Augusto Boal, the avant-garde theatre movement of the 60s, perhaps different purposes, but all of them wanting to make an impact and a change to society through their performative aspects. Games. Now you might wonder, why is games included here? Well, games of skill and strength, popularly recorded since early civilization, and still are regarded as a form of entertainment, but also a symbol of skill and strength of individuals, cultures, countries, communities. And like theatre, games usually watched by spectators, for instance, the Olympic Games. So there's a link there, as I will tell you about. Martial arts sometimes feature strongly as games of skill and strength. In some East Asian theatre, for instance, Chinese opera, martial arts becomes integral to that form, and you have martial characters and martial type plays with elaborate combat scenes. So you can see there's a blur between martial arts and theatre. And some theatre forms in particular show a strong relationship with martial arts and physical contests, focusing on physical discipline and physical skills in performance or the preparation for. And again, I'm thinking a lot of what you might call Eastern theatre, no theatre, Chinese opera, the physical theatre umbrella of different theatre types. There's a bodily, martial art, physical preparation and focus in the performative aspects. And games like theatre also commonly share that element of tension and conflict. There's a conflict of people, there's a conflict of characters, a conflict of ideas. This generates attention, this pulls in the audience, and they're drawn in, they're rooting for one side or the other to succeed. You can see there a combat scene from a Peking opera performance, and then a performer from the Nanjing Kun Opera, demonstrating physical discipline as he's balanced there on one leg, showing a specific technique to some of my former theatre students. So as you can see, there are varying routes of theatre, and let's not forget, it's difficult to prove them, but we're trying to seek out as much of the truth as possible. There's dance, there's storytelling, there's mimesis, there's ritual, there's games. They overlap, they interact, they're refined through over time to become specific theatre forms. So, as I just said, presentational forms and the functions become more sophisticated, society's needs change, society becomes more secular, or you have a working class that need to be entertained or whatever. And these aspects develop into early theatre forms, be it ancient Egyptian or ancient Greek theatre, Chinese opera for one in the East, indigenous and popular theatre forms in Africa and Latin America. They're just examples, of course. And there's the sources. I hope you have enjoyed the presentation, and it's given you some food for thought about where theatre originally comes from and how it developed. Thank you.